Bonjour, Winnowing and Nene. Bonjour, Gardner. Bonjour, Jean. Bonjour, Skakmakwe. Bonjour, Mishomas, Winnowing and Nene. Oh. Kichimigwach, grandfather, Winnowing. Grandfather, wild rice. You nurture us and you take care of us. And we come to you humbly, Shwan Mishnan, pitifully. We ask you to take care of us as you've taken care of many generations before us, for tens of thousands of years. You nurture us and tend to us. You take care of us and our ancestors and our feasts. You take care of our spirits, the Menadawak, in our ceremonies. You helped find our homeland when Bibon took it from us, and we were lost and had to begin a migration route. You nurture our people to this day, and we come to you humbly to harvest so that we can spread your seed in new locations and help Winnowing grow across our territory again. We don't come to you looking for profit. We come to you looking for sustenance and support. We come to you with no desire of greed to take too much, knowing that we're going to knock as much as we can back into these waters so it can come back again. Oh, grandfather, miigwech, 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 miigwech. It's a good spot here. So some people, including me occasionally, will tap the two sticks together, and that's what you do early in the season most of the time so that you're not damaging the stalks, because what happens is these seeds ripen from the top down slowly, so you actually can get more than one harvest off each plant. But if you break that stem by whacking it too hard, there's no more seeds. So they'll tap gently at the beginning of the season. You can see some scatter down there. It's not a very efficient method though, especially when you're moving through the swamp. And so the most common way, we call that woodpeckering. The better way is to do what's called a sweep. And you bring it in and you strike down along the stems. And I'll use this other ricing stick, Bawaganok, as like a guide so that I don't hit them directly too violently, like that. And I can knock the seeds straight down in. And that's the other benefit, is if I tap like this with an empty canoe, they can actually bounce and reverberate out and you lose a lot of your rice back into the water. We do want to reseed by knocking some in, and we do that still this way. But because they're coming in on an angle, they fly in and they don't bounce out as much. So some goes into the water, a lot goes into the canoe. First time I went ricing, I was 12 years old with my dad. We went down to Wisconsin, Mill Lac, I believe, and we harvested there. And there it's thick, really, really thick rice. Like, you have to use a push pull, you can't use a paddle at all. And that's what I was accustomed to. So when I came back this way, I grew up in Bruce County, came back here to Hiawatha First Nation when I was 18, 19, went for my first ricing mission in this area when I was 20, and it was just sparse. And I was like, where's the rice? They're like, that's the rice. I'm like, how's that the rice? It should be so thick. And I had to learn about the whole transseverance system that affected the wild rice population. How deep the water is can really affect that rice growth, because it's such a tiny little grain. And it has all the energy to grow its grass stem to then photosynthesize. And if it doesn't have enough of that energy to get up to the surface of the water, it just drowns and dies. So we're really lucky here because it's getting thick, because we're controlling this water here by by keeping it dammed off from the Trans-Severn, controlling the water with a little lock system that we have here, or canal system that we have here. And we can keep it shallow enough so that we can grow the Winnowing in the right way. So it's like this. Now we sometimes in a patch like this, we feel like we got to push pull, but we can still paddle. Ricing season is the new moon of August to the new moon of September. We actually just passed the very end of when we should be harvesting, but we're lucky because this spot is sheltered, so there's still some. We call it in our language Menominake Gizis. Menomin being the rice itself, the good seed or the spirit grain, and then Ike or Ke, talking about that gathering or bringing things together. So Menominake is the harvesting of wild rice, and then Gizis being that moon period. So Menominake Gizis is the ricing moon from new moon to new moon. Some people go by the full moons. I was taught to go by the new moon. So we harvested Winnowing today, and the color of it is real green to slight brown, and it's wet. It's really wet. And if we tried to process it today, we'd end up making mush because those kernels aren't firm enough to be able to process. We got to do something called curing. It's not the same as drying. A lot of people think when you're laying out all that wild rice on mats or blankets out in the sun that you're drying it. That's not the goal. The goal is to allow the kernels to firm up and cure. You actually want a little bit of water left in that rice, in that manome, in that wild rice, so that when you get to this process of parching, that steam is developed and it causes the husk to break free from the steam jacket around the kernel. So you need to have a little bit of moisture. So much so that this stuff that we're using, it's over 1.5 years old. To process, it's so dry we had to actually add a little bit of water to it just to get it to cause some steaming effect. And once that steam begins, the oils start to come out and it becomes this dark, rich color. And so we go from green to straw color to this dark, dark brown straw color. And it's going to look oily and it's going to feel oily. And when we put it into the cauldron at first to parch, it's like throwing a handful of straw in there. It's just kind of helter-skelter and chaotic and wants to fight you the whole way through. But as you move it and that steam effect happens, and you break those little pieces of the chaff and the husk in here, and the oils start to get pressed out from the heat, it becomes almost fluid-like. It rolls through the cauldron really well. It doesn't stick to anywhere. It moves together almost like fluid, like liquid. And that's how we know we're close to done. From there, it's all about sight, texture, and smell. And so we can see this color coming out. There's a popped kernel right there. I'll pull that out. And it's just like popcorn. You just chew it. Tastes very similar to popcorn, a little bit of salt, a little bit of oil or butter. They're actually a really good snack, but that's not the goal here. We don't want to pop all this. We want to process it. Yeah, there it is. It doesn't smell like straw anymore. It doesn't smell like grass seed anymore. And the texture is, it's supposed to be very warm, almost hot to the touch, but I can feel that there's husks can be just rolled off. If I just roll my fingers back and forth on that kernel, the husk comes off, and there's our wild rice. We just lined this pit with a piece of smoked tan moose hide. You can use tarps. You can use, I wouldn't recommend a blanket because they will just grind into it, but a tarp, like a canvas sheet. Modern tan leather you can use as well. I prefer to use smoked tan hide because of the chemicals that could be in those tarps or in that chrome tan modern leather. Same with my moccasins that I'll wear in here. This is basically the threshing process. If you go to, China and Japan and other cultures that have Asian, Ariza style rice, they have threshing tools. Like, well, that's where nunchucks originated, was actually a threshing tool for grains. And in Europe, you had other threshing tools as well. Those long poles with a stick on the end you would strike with. We didn't do that. We used our feet. A lot like crushing grapes in France and Italy. And we use these soft moccasins, preferably brand new ones, but these ones I've kept clean. And every year you would have new ones made just to dance in the rice, and they'd be, mid shin, ankle high or more, your classic snowshoe moccasin. And so we would get our snowshoe moccasins made now, dance the rice with them, and then those would be our winter shoes they would wear on our snowshoes. Mine are in storage right now, so we're going to use my ankle highs. Probably going to get spurred a few times. You really do want to wear, you don't want to go into this barefoot, because these spurs on this are still quite hard and they can cause splintering. It can be quite hard, and even the kernel itself can poke you real good. So having something like this, but you don't want to use boots or shoes that have a hard sole. You want to use something soft, and you're going to be moving the dance. It's called dancing the rice. We're going to brace our weight mostly on these two poles. Pour the rice in thick enough to kind of pat it so it doesn't get crushed immediately. And then lower our weight down carefully, and we start moving our feet almost like we're doing the mashed potato dance. And we're just going to grind the kernels between that leather and the leather of our moccasin until the kernel comes free. It's all crushed and pulverized, the husk. It's more like pulp now. And in there you can see the kernels. If I hold this in the breeze, that chaff, that husk blows away. And those heavy kernels stay behind. There's a whole lot of ways to winnow. This is just one way. This is just a down and dirty way when you got no other options. You just lift it, rub it up in the air, let the kernels hit the tarp or the blanket or whatever you're using and let the chaff blow away. If you have bushcraft and the time, unlike me, to make what's called a winnowing tray, it's a birch bark container similar in size to this, but wider and shallower, almost like a gold pan. And the idea is to bounce that basket, and the chaff blows away while the kernels stay in the basket. Another way that many people do, including myself, is lay out a tarp and just throw it in the air over the tarp on one end and make sure the tarp is long for the wind. This is a long process. This is the most tedious part of the process, cleaning that rice, getting all that chaff out of there. There's a lot of ways to use it. You can make pilafs, you can make rice puddings, you can make casseroles, you can make stuffing. My favorite meal with wild rice outside of like my grandmother's wild rice pudding was goose stuffed with wild rice. A goose shot on the exact same rice field that we harvested rice in a week or two before. And then we plucked it, processed it, cleaned it, made a bunch of wild rice, cooked it prior, soaked it overnight, then cooked it for a couple hours early, and then stuffed it into the goose, and then cooked the goose the rest of the way with onions and apples and all that inside the cavity with this. And then you had this wild rice stuffing that you could have with the goose. It was absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. The meal we had today was wild rice with just puff balls that were cooked down in butter and then added to the wild rice with a little bit of maple syrup and some salt and pepper. Maybe some garlic and onions if you got it, but it's not necessary. There's so much good flavor in the rice already, in the Manoomin already. So the Manoomin has been processed. It needs a little bit of cleaning still. There's a few that have their husks still on that we can just kind of hand roll and release them from. And that'll just take, a couple hours at the dinner table, sitting around having a coffee. In total, I have about 3 sacks back at the house, big grain sacks ready to go. And this is the finished product. And this is nutritious, delicious Manoomin. This is the whole point of what is my fall beginning. I look at like wild rice as the same way I look at maple syrup and maple sugar. Maple sugar is the beginning of my spring. That is my new year. That is my big event in the spring to signify that it is now spring. I can get ready for summertime and gardens and everything else. Manoomin, wild rice, it's the same thing for the fall for me. This is now autumn. We're now in fall. I can now get ready for duck hunting, goose hunting, deer hunting, moose hunting, harvesting acorns, bringing in the crops from the garden, getting ready for winter time, getting all those materials I need for winter, firewood, everything else. This is that like celebration of that beginning right here in food form. And there's nothing better than something you can celebrate by eating it. So, Manoomin, the good grain, the spirit seed, however you want to translate Manoomin. It is a beautiful thing.